The absolute hardest part of building wealth in Australia right now isn't buying your third investment property, and it isn't managing a $500,000 share portfolio. It's grinding your way to your very first $50,000. Ask anyone who has done it, and they'll tell you the exact same thing. The stretch between $0 and $50,000 feels like an endless uphill battle where you're working 40 or 50 hours a week, cutting back on everything that makes life enjoyable, and looking at your bank account only to realize the needle is barely moving. It feels like trying to push a 2-ton car from a dead stop. You are throwing every single ounce of your energy into it, sweating, struggling, and yet you're barely moving a single centimeter. But once that car is actually rolling, keeping it moving takes a fraction of the effort. In Australia's 2026 economic landscape, the first $50,000 is that dead stop. The average full-time salary in this country might look decent on paper at around $106,000 before tax, but when you actually look at the math of what lands in your account versus what goes out, you realize why that first chunk of capital feels impossible to secure. After the tax department takes its share, you're left with roughly $78,000. Now factor in the reality of living costs that have been jumping by up to 4.2% across Australian households. If you're renting a standard apartment or house in Sydney or Melbourne, you are easily burning through $30,000 to $40,000 a year just to keep a roof over your head. Add in utilities, groceries that seem to break a new record every time you hit the checkout, transport, and basic insurance, and the typical Australian is left with a savings capacity of maybe $10,000 to $15,000 a year if they are being incredibly disciplined. That means your first $50,000 represents 3, 4, or even 5 years of raw, uninterrupted sacrifice. It is literally thousands of tiny daily decisions where you had to say no. No to the weekend trip away. No to the new car on finance. No to the constant Uber Eats orders. And no to the lifestyle inflation that catches all your mates. Every dollar of that first $50,000 is paid for in pure human effort. It is 100% heavy lifting done by you, your time, and your labor. Your money is contributing absolutely nothing to the equation because it hasn't reached the critical mass required to make its presence felt. If you have $5,000 sitting in a high-interest savings account earning a relatively high rate of 5.5%, your money makes about $275 a year. That doesn't even cover a single weekly grocery run. It's an invisible return. But something fascinating happens once you clear that $50,000 mark and transition toward your next $200,000. The entire physics of wealth creation flips on its head. The next $200,000 is mathematically faster and psychologically easier than the first $50,000 because you are no longer fighting the battle alone. You've finally built a financial engine that has started to assist you. When you have $50,000 deployed into a broad-based index fund like VAS or IVV on the ASX, or even compounding inside a tax-effective asset structure, you stop relying solely on what you can save from your paycheck. If the market delivers a historically conservative return of 10%, including reinvested dividends, that $50,000 generates $5,000 in a single year without you lifting a finger. Think about what that actually means. That $5,000 return is the equivalent of you working an extra 2 or 3 weeks at your job completely for free. Or it's the equivalent of cutting your expenses by another $100 every single week of the year. Your money has officially become your employee. It is turning up to work every single day, working 24 hours a day, through public holidays and weekends, and pouring extra capital back into your pile. And because you've already spent years building the behavioral habits required to save that first $50,000, your baseline savings rate is now locked in. You aren't leaking money anymore on impulse purchases because you've already broken the scarcity mindset that causes people to spend money just to feel a temporary hit of dopamine. So now, you are adding your usual $15,000 a year from your salary, but your portfolio is tossing in another $5,000, then $7,000, then $10,000 a year. The compounding snowball shifts from an abstract theory in a finance book into a tangible, aggressive force in your real life. By the time your portfolio scales toward the $150,000 or $200,000 mark, a single good year in the share market can easily swing your net worth up by $20,000 in a matter of months. That is more wealth than most Australians can manage to save through an entire year of physical labor. This is the exact point where the wealth gap in Australia widens into a chasm. The people who are stuck under the $50,000 line are playing the game on maximum difficulty. They are constantly exposed to the friction of everyday life. A blown transmission on the car, an unexpected dental bill, or a sudden rent increase doesn't just slow them down, it completely wipes out their momentum and resets their progress back to zero. They are trapped in a short-term survival loop where their cognitive energy is entirely consumed by managing immediate financial crises. But when you cross that threshold, you aren't just accumulating digits on a screen. You are buying cognitive bandwidth. You are buying the ability to look 2, 5, and 10 years into the future because you aren't terrified about how you're going to pay next fortnight's electricity bill. You start making decisions based on long-term ROI rather than short-term survival. You have the leverage to negotiate harder for a salary increase because you aren't desperate for the next paycheck. You have the capital to jump on genuine investment opportunities, whether that's a property dip, a market correction, or upskilling yourself to double your earning capacity. The tragic irony of wealth accumulation is that the game is set up to be the most punishing at the exact moment you have the least amount of leverage. If you are sitting there right now with $5,000, $10,000, or $20,000 in savings, and you feel like you are sacrificing everything while getting nowhere, you need to understand that this is exactly how the math is supposed to feel at the start. You aren't failing. You are simply paying the unavoidable entry fee to get into the game. The momentum you are building right now through those frustrating, invisible deposits is compressing the timeline for everything that comes next. You just have to stay disciplined long enough to let the machine take over the heavy lifting.